Welcome. You're in the Healing Zone. I'm your host, Oscar Crawford. Today, my guest is Gwen Mets, and we're discussing how world religions factor into the ideas of supremacy, child care, and child abuse. Join us with a podcast now in progress.
Different, and to have faith. It's not, God is not exactly, it's really interesting. I just started, I'm kind of interested in seeing it, and I always find it very fascinating that when there's something that people do not understand, they become very trigger happy, scared. Like, you know, when somebody just is genuinely who they are and stands in that, the fear it causes and the unknown, you know, because people are out of their comfort zones. I find the whole thing very interesting. The movie's not just based on the fact that he's the Messiah, but what his proclamations and what he's doing, how it's throwing everybody off.
Yeah, it threatens people. You're right.
Yes.
When an authentic person materializes in culture, in family and community, everybody's pretty jacked up about that because they've never seen that before.
It challenges all the, you know,
I want to
what
ask you
they
a question
think.
real quick. Have you ever read the New Testament?
You know, bits and pieces, not in a while. I've been wanting to pick it up again and kind of look, you know, through again. And, you know, it's just really difficult because also when you have a Bible, you know, if one word is translated different, it also depending on the denomination is coming from, you know.
Well, here's the real deal. You're right in context in that what is read is not the original language. Now, what I want to share with you, though, is the Old Testament, for which there are 39 books in the legitimized canon by whoever the legitimizers were. All right, and when
is that the agnostic, right? They say the agnostic is the closest to the originals, or
no, not at all, not at all. In terms of the Old Testament, only those texts that were determined to be appropriate for what is called canon, right? Which is a whole group of materials that have essentially the same theme, telling a story, telling a narrative. Hebrew people, now Jews, did that. They did that. They decided what was in and what wasn't. Now, others have picked and chosen over them again, and some people have added more. Catholics have added more to the books than other groups. But it's different. The point I want to make here is that the first 4 books of the New Testament are of the life of Jesus, who is a Jew, and he was following the practices of Judaism. And from the book of Acts through the epistles of Paul, we get a different narrative where Jesus had said he came to save the Jews. Now, this other guy, Paul, is coming to say, you know, Jesus chose me to bring the message to all the others. And Gentile was just a word for dog. I mean, the people dogs, right? In Jewish traditional perspective. And so then the last few books are just epistles of the people that were with Jesus, writing some things that they thought of importance. And so like when Catholics make a new pope, this is the same way these texts were determined which one was to be in. And so what Jews have to say about Christians is that Christians hijack their book to legitimize their movement. And so just a lot of dynamics going on in the whole piece.
Well, plus look, in the time of Constantine, there were things changed because when the church and the monarchy were, you know, hand in hand, and kings could change whatever suited their, you know, it's really difficult. You know, it's really interesting to me. Like, I wonder why modern day Christianity have a really hard time admitting that things like the 10 Commandments or things that are in books has been around, you know, from the originals. I mean, look at in Egypt and things that are so much older and have, you know, the guidelines. You know, all religions take a little bit from something. There's always something a little bit older, but Christians will, and me especially where I live here, I guess I should say, anytime I
capital
ask.
City or the capital area, there's the southeastern United States, that's the Bible Belt. Well, where you are is highly competitive with them. Ultra right-wing conservative believe every word was uttered out of the mouth, which God has no mouth, mind of God to a human being. What is interesting is that There's no criteria for the people God chose, just everybody who's in the books that have been chosen. Christians believe God chose them. And then if you get into the discussion about what's the Holy Spirit, then it gets even more complicated, right?
Yeah, I don't understand why it would be a problem saying, okay, we have these books. Okay, the 10 Commandments, maybe used in different names and scrolls. I mean, if you look at the Quran, if you look at, religion, if you look at any religion, there is an original text, right? Almost exactly. It's just changed a bit. I don't know why it's a problem to say, because it's God, it's all God, correct?
Okay, can I tell you this and breathe deep for me? I'm going to lay one on you. Mm-hmm. It's because white people from Western Europe founded America. They needed something to make their movements absolute and to make white people supreme. That's all that's about. And if you believe that, if you believe you're the master image in a human body of God, then nobody can tell you anything and you don't have to agree with anything anybody else says. You have a whole separate reality.
Even though it's right there in history, in text, they just do not want it. I'm like, it does not take away from what you believe and what you're doing with God to admit that you have some of, what was created, occurred, what happened, and what belongs to other religions. Why? And it's not, again, where I live, of course, and I've lived through Mississippi and Louisiana and Oklahoma, and they, it's pretty much, no. These books and these words and these did not exist before that time. I'm like, how is that even possible? Read it. Read something thousands of years older. I mean, but at the same time, it shouldn't really be a surprise to me because these are the same denominations, same churches who depict Christ as white. So,
when the book says he had nappy hair,
yes,
and his feet like bronze.
How could he not?
Yeah, I know.
Yes, I know. And just like the artifacts in Egypt that they come across, there's picks, literally bone picks, for hair, and then they say that they removed or when some of the artifacts and statues and the names and everything in Egypt was discovered, that there are portions of them broken off where it showed almost cornrows,
Right.
And that just happened to break off of I don't know, the whole domination of everything, like something is less.
If it's different.
I don't know how that would make anything less. To me, that would make it more. It's the older, it's the original. It's been here for as long, and it's God. Once it's God, and if people truly believe what they believe, I don't understand how any of it's an issue.
I agree.
It will never make sense to me. And here, I kind of stopped having that conversation because they get really stiff and uncomfortable and offended if you say. It's they just ostrich and head in the sand. No, that 10 Commandments was not around. It was not based on other. Like they think they're plagiarizing. I'm like, we're talking about God. We're talking about the Word of God. We're not talking about somebody who took a book, rewrote it, and wrote somebody's name on called a ghostwriter.
Right.
If it's the Word of God, why does that matter?
I'm with you. Listen, here's the challenge for me. If you exempt religion from the discussion, when I was in Korea a few weeks, I witnessed something that I didn't know how to relate to, because everybody in Korea that's Korean looks the same, and I don't mean that in absolute terms, but in terms of the cultural context, everybody looks the same. But they have a caste system there, like India, to where if you don't fit certain levels of caste, you're not worthy, right?
It's so sad that Indian women, who are darker skinned, have a harder time being matched with husbands, and I've heard that's interesting.
Well, I have a friend in India who I've known for years, and she struggled with wanting her mate selected for her, and then she got to aging, and then she got desperate to get a husband, so she met a person, and within 90 days was married to the person. And then, I said, you no longer have any privilege to talk to me about what you don't like. You've made a choice. And my input is no longer relevant. you've made a significant choice for the rest of your life based on what your culture programmed you to be available to. And there's nothing you can do about that.
No.
Yeah.
And it's such a widely used practice still, and the matchmakers who are the professionals, they go through star charts, they go through, and I know everybody says that arranged marriages, 40%, only 40% end. I don't know. There's a very, very, very low divorce rate, and I'm like, and I don't think that's because they match. I think that's because people feel stuck. It's a lot of family pressure. I don't believe that it's because not marrying for love makes more sense or works out better. I think divorce doesn't happen also, again, because of cultural pressure, not because it works better as a system.
Do you know the name Sun Myung Moon?
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds...
It was called Reverend Moon. He used to take people into Madison Square Garden, an equal number of men, equal number of women, and he'd walk through and look at a woman and say, come here, and then look at a man and say, come here, put their hands together and bow, and they were married. Now,
oh, wow.
they weren't legally married, they were spiritually married, and they couldn't consummate their marriage until such time as both of them had reproduced 5 other people into the fold. At the point they had both brought 5 new people in, then they had the right to go ahead and have a civil ceremony and begin to get busy with each other.
It sounds like a pyramid scheme.
Well, no, listen. For the record, there are always people who purport they want to go along with plans who change their mind later on and opt out. But in terms of the way these marriages were made, their divorce rates are so small, it's negligible. The Mormons are not as successful at this, but they've got a whole other set of dynamics going on that work against them too. I'm saying this. One of the things that I noted was that Reverend Moon's he's from North Korea actually, but he moved to South Korea. And I know him. I got to know him personally for a bit and work with his teams all over the world for a bit. So when I saw him matching all these different couples, it interested me because he only matched his children with the same cultural context while he was mixing up everybody everywhere else. And so, I guess if you're the God guy, you can make the rules to suit yourself because he certainly didn't apply those rules. And I mean, he did mix Koreans with Europeans and Africans and all that, but when it came to his bloodline, he stayed Korean.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's that subconscious. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about it's subconscious. I think it's absolutely intentional.
Oh, yes, but also,
it doesn't follow the rules that one set out.
Yeah, and I guess subconscious isn't the right word, but just that thing of conditioning. Like you say, okay, so as long as it's somebody else, it's okay, but once it's within my own, humans and human nature is very interesting to me.
Well, it's like the monarchies you were making reference to from Europe. Monarchies kept that power in their own bloodline, right? So mixed breeding breeding within one's own bloodline only stopped when they finally discovered that made crazy people.
Oh yeah, I mean cousins upon cousins.
Yeah.
I always find it interesting to watch the old period pieces, and I was going back through Elizabeth last night.
Okay.
And Victoria, I like the dynamic, between the Mary Queen of Scots and the cousin, and all of that, and the expectations of family, and if you look down the line, of course, a lot of the kings, you do have some crazy. I mean, you got King Henry. I don't know. There's that alone can tell, Yeah. But there, in Italy, they still. I actually know somebody who her parents are first cousins,
right?
And they came from Italy, and it's interesting to me in this day and age, and knowing what it is that they're still small, villages and European areas, other areas where your first cousins are still.
It happens in Iraq now. It's not uncommon at all. I have a close friend who talks to me about the life that she observed, and when she would talk to me about her parents, she would talk about their common relatives and how close they were. And so I never pursued that because that was all I needed to be made aware of.
Yeah, there's a lot that comes from that down the lines. Like I said, it's interesting that in this day and age, with everything people know and medical knowledge and this, that it would still be a practice, because people are so careful on their bloodlines, as they say, and want their families to be so pure, and then do something that's the exact opposite of that.
Of course. Unrestrained sexualities produce nightmares. They just do.
Yeah.
Okay, so I regard there was a time where we lived without a spirituality and a civilization for real. Mm-hmm. Everything was just whatever it can make itself be. But now, under the context of living in a spiritual civilization, that mess still goes on.
Oh yeah. And and of course it's suited to survive. I mean, the things that happen in the name of God too is also scary. I don't know. There's so much.
Well, my brain goes in a million directions. If you're the chosen one, then you can choose to do what you want.
Yeah, I start speaking of Latter-day Saints and Mormons, and the communes. I know a lot of Mormon people in my hometown, San Diego, and just what I see, of course, happening in Salt Lake City and these young child brides, and I can't even believe it's still a practice in these young brides. Like, you see these movies, see these things, and people are like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. I'm like, wait, and I'm like, no, these things happen on American soil. This happens.
Yes.
I have a best friend. They were not Mormon. This was non-denominational Christian. One of my best friends from San Diego I grew up with, Joy, ended up at a very young age in a relationship with an older man who was her youth pastor at a church in San Diego. And she married him, and he was already married.
Oh,
and
okay.
She was the second wife in the household, and I did not want to lose my friend, so I spent time around the family. She had kids by him, and he was her youth pastor at a church.
Right.
And they lived together, and the first wife had kids, it's all separate areas. Well, he murdered her. He murdered my best friend. So he had, and there's a lot of dateline, and the closer it gets to the anniversary, all of us tend to get a lot more, we don't answer phones and emails during the anniversary because they made Dateline episodes, and you can look it up on But he was a ghostwriter of Christian books, and he's actually from Oklahoma originally, crazy enough. And I was around him for years, and I had not even an inkling. He was just that good, that charismatic, and I had moved away, and I got a call one time that she went missing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure why I'm bringing this up around. Maybe it's because of multiple marriage thing. I don't know, because people always blamed it on that, but I think it goes a little deeper than that. So I get a message from him that, she's missing. She sent me an email. She sent him a message saying, I'm in love with somebody else. I'm moving to Europe. And she didn't take her kids. And I'm like, this is not right.
Right.
She would never do this. So then a month later, he walked himself into a police station and confessed after some jog. He actually murdered her in the house, pre-planned it because she wanted out and wanted to take her kids. He planned a whole week. He dismembered her, drove her body out to Arizona, as a matter of fact, and the hikers came across a makeshift little stone. So he was a firm believer in multiple size families and inner families, and he wanted to start a whole movement. And he's written some books, and I think it'd be interesting to check out. I was going to send you a couple of books. He was a ghostwriter for them. But as I look through these things now, it held every clue, of what. And he used his trial as a time to kind of witness and testify to some things that are crazy, because he still thinks he's going to be with her in heaven, and she'll forget, he planned her murder and murdered her, and...
Wow.
It was, yes, bought all the things, rented a car, dismembered it was horrific. It was horrific. And we didn't find out. He was sending us emails in her name, me and a couple of her closest friends. And he's still, to this day, he's sitting in jail, writing books, telling everybody that his church will materialize. He will make this part. Like, he really thinks that his dogma and the way and the multiple wives and multiple families, and one day she forgives him. And her case was interesting because it was the first time they had used the technology of recreating, because she was completely dismembered by the time they found his bones. No teeth were there. He took those, no fingers. He was very meticulous about this. And it was the first time they had ever used this technology of doing a 3D image of a face. Her name is Joy Risker, R-I-S-K-R, and if you do it, search for her name, Google it, it'll come up with all kinds of stuff, and his name was Sean. But I start to look back, and I had known her since we were in 7th grade. We met the first day of 7th grade. And I look and I see and I wonder sometimes, and it just, as the anniversary comes up closer each time, or her birthday comes up, I think about this because her mother, who was also named Gwendolyn, and who had died from a heart attack a couple years before that, her mom wasn't there, but she was abandoned by her father, and Joy was the most amazing, beautiful, vibrant soul you'll ever meet. But I wonder sometimes, and I think this is, if the situation with her father led her to this. Because Sean was older than her, obviously, by 10, 12 years. He was in his early 30s by the time she was 19, 20 when they got married, Mm-hmm. And I still think, and I don't know, for some reason I'm feeling the need to talk about this right now.
That's okay.
I'm wondering what happened in her, growing up watching, was there some more sign? Is it because of the dad? Is it, he was absent? What leads somebody to a situation or a life like this? Did she need something that badly? Because we always, all of her friends, our closest friends, when we get together, we say, what could we have done? I had moved away, so I wasn't local as much, but she, a couple of weeks before she went missing, she told me, she's like, something else had happened. I think there was another woman. She had discovered that he had murdered somebody else. But he didn't know, because he had brought this woman to the household into another room, and she stayed there, and he said she was marked with the devil.
Wow.
And he was helping her go, and all of a sudden one day this woman was gone, and she happened to be from Oklahoma, and she's like, I don't know what's happening, I'm scared. I said, come here. I was in Mississippi working at the time for a federal judge. I said, come, I'll help you just get out then. And then 3 weeks later she was,
right,
gone. But I just wonder, sometimes I look through all this stuff with pain and trauma and this, and I don't know if there was more I didn't know that had ever happened to her. But I wonder what makes people and women who are, obviously it has nothing to do with pure intelligence, and I'm not saying unintelligent, because everybody's been the product of something, and it doesn't mean that they're not smart, they don't see it, but sometimes things happen so slowly, or people are so charismatic or so good at what they're slowly doing that, they zero in on what they see as missing or a need,
right.
Targeting that. And I don't know, I still just sit and think about a lot, what was the sequence of events to lead to this? And should I have, I supported the situation just because she seemed happy. I liked the other wife. Sean was always really nice and good, I don't know. Sometimes I look back, I'm like, was there a moment way before that was I not being a good friend I just didn't want to lose my friend. I wanted to see her, and I knew if I didn't accept kind of her situation, I wouldn't have been able to really be,
That's true.
I know.
So listen, just for the record, and I know you know this already, you bear no responsibility in what happened to her. You loved her while she was present. You were her good friend, and she made a choice and stayed with that choice just a little too long.
Yeah.
I'm regret. I wish I could tell you that this was an exceptional experience, but we know this happens.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. This happens often. If we take a look at the record of how many women are physically abused a week in the United States alone, that's a staggering number. And then correlate that to the number of children who are physically and sexually abused in a week in America. That's a staggering number, and you wonder if we are civilized at all.
Yeah, Oklahoma has the highest rate of child abuse cases in the country. I don't know if it still is, but it was, because I had kinship, I had foster children.
Okay.
Before me and the kids lived here in the Jinx area, we lived out by Keystone Lake area, and it was a home with a lot of property and the people across. There was six brothers and sisters who were all biologically related, and they were living with adoptive parents. So they had already been removed from a home at some point, and they when I met them, the ages ranged at that time between 13 down to 3.
Well, I think that's another problem that being Christian drags along with it. There is this text in the Hebrew Bible that says, spare the rod and spoil the child. And so that's given many parents license not to punish their children, but to literally beat them. And to beat them into submission until their wills are broken. And they wonder why their children were not as productive as they became adults. Well, when you beat that out of people, it's hard for them to get it back.
Yeah, I mean, they came from a drug-addicted mother household, so they were adopted by these two, by a couple who were very involved in a Christian church nearby. They adopted all 6, and all 6 lived across from us. And then I started noticing some strange things after a while. They were always over. I started after a bit that, the husband was a little too quiet. And one day, the oldest came to me, and it was a horrific stuff happening in that household.
Of course.
Horrific. And that was the people they trusted. They went to them. That was their adoptive parents. And the mom, I think, did not want to see what was happening. And then I found out that there was a lot of, and then it turned out being sexual abuse. So it was, reported between me and the pastor of that church. All 6 were removed from the household, and I took kinship because this was literally 2 weeks before Christmas. Okay. And they were always with me. So all 6 came. Luckily at that time, because I'm not a big fan of big houses. I hate big houses, a lot to clean. I think it all kind of led to that place, because I don't really always enjoy being way out in the country just because it feels so isolated. So it was a 7-bedroom home with some property. So I took all of them in. I got emergency kinship. And now pretty much all of them are doing. The oldest boy is now like 20, and they were with me for a year, because my fear was, okay, they've been horribly abused at the beginning of life, because they all didn't really have the same fathers, but they had the same life. Then these people took them in and gave them a life, and then that happens to them. And I said, and my fear was I didn't want them to get split up. They needed each other, because some were very young. That's all they had. And my kids were very young. They were there literally. Cece grew up around. Cece has, not as many memories, because I wasn't allowed, after they went back with the with the adoptive mother. I'm going to jump around on this story. Okay. Eventually, after she went through stuff, and she put a restraining order. She did not want me to see them, so I had to wait till each of them, as they're turning 18, for them to contact me, which, to have as they grow up. Because she knew that there wasn't a trust, and that they enjoyed being, my household, and they felt safe there, and they needed to bridge back in. So she was like, she was tired of hearing about me, I guess, probably. But I took them thinking, I cannot imagine what these kids, they were already hurting, thought they moved into a safe place, got hurt all over again, and then they're going to get separated. I didn't know what that would do to them for the rest of life, and we'd become so close. And Sebastian, my son, was so little. He was, when Cece was born, he was like a year and a half too, and so she was born. So the oldest of these kids, they grew up around Cece, as a baby. They were in my household, and she was there, so they were family to me, But that always scared me, because I'm like, I can't imagine the path they could all go down if they then been split up and moved into different other foster homes or something, you know.
The record of foster homes, the record, and look, this may be the exception, but in the times where I have specifically been a professional counselor in situations where teenage kids were the people served, every child that I worked with who was placed in a foster home was getting the same kind of abuse in the foster home they were getting at home.
Yeah. And when you have 6 who are blood related, and then they were fully adopted into that other family, and then I knew about the physical abuse, but it came out about 2 months of them being in my household. I found out that there had been sexual abuse on the 2 girls. It took a while for me to get them to say I could tell. So I got the police and I testified against him. He's in jail. He's actually due to be paroled in a couple months. But so he ended up going to jail. So when the children were then bridged back into that household after me, it was just the mom. That was the whole point, is the court said, you have to divorce him. He has to never have access to the child and to even bridge back. Because in Oklahoma, they're very big on bridging kids back into the original home.
Yeah, I know.
And which I get, they do this, but the resources are so minuscule here. Like, there's kids getting put back into households where the abuse, of course, is repeated just because they don't have enough fostering. They don't have enough caseworkers. So, I mean, it was a little easier than you would expect. The judge granted me kinship pretty fast, but I knew them, and I knew the family, and I knew the kids, so it made it a little easier. But I was like, I can't imagine what will happen to these children 2 weeks before Christmas. They've been abused, now they're pulled in, now they're going to be separated, and they're going to be put into group homes. I'm like, I just can't see that happening. And I was like, I want these kids to know that not everybody in this world is out to try to get something from them or use them or hurt them. I needed them to know that there are people who, and I wanted them to stay together. It wasn't easy. It was a rough year. It wasn't easy, but I mean, the oldest is in college. Like, the next one's in college. Like, he contacted his 18th birthday. He contacted me, and they've each, as they age out, you know, because of that. So it's nice. I wasn't sure ever if I made a big enough impact, but when he told me that being there, you know, was a healing time, it made me, you know, really happy to hear that even though they went back into the household, they at least knew and grew up knowing that somebody cared. Somebody truly just cared for them and didn't, you know.
No, I get you. I do. Yeah. That overflowing heart of yours I talk about, that none of anything you've just shared with me is a surprise to me. That is who you are. And the kids that you've had influence with are never going to forget you, because you were at the right moment, at the right time for them to feel like they really existed and had some value. You gave that.
I hope so. I hope it was enough for all of them, you know, a little bit. Some of them were pretty young, so who I haven't been able to have any contact with yet because they haven't aged out. But I keep their pictures around, and then Sebastian and Cece remembers that. She's seen them after the fact later, but she was so young, you know. But I never did it again. I could have fostered again, but it just got to the point after a while then where it was really tough for me, and my kids were young, and then I started to get sick after a bit, and I just couldn't give what I wish I could have. But I have considered taking it. I go, you know, I can redo. I have considered, you know, we have a lot of refugees coming through and kids from Ukraine, and I've considered on trying to, you know, redoing the license and maybe taking, because I know we only get a few, you know, California is getting a lot of the refugees, a lot of Oregon, and then we have New York. There's not as much down here, but I know that there's a shortage of homes, short-term homes. And I've considered that, but at the same time, I wonder, I'm like, can I give it to somebody else with everything wrong with me? Like, I don't know what the right decision is on that, because I just feel they're so shell-shocked and traumatized, and it's so sad. It's so sad.
I know. Thank you for joining us for part 1 of my podcast discussion with Gwen Mets. If you would like to contact Gwen, write to the podcast at healingwithoscarcrawford@gmail.com, and she'll respond to all of your email from there. healingwithoscarcrawford@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining us. Stay tuned for part 2.